Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I thought we'd look at some pretty essential workflow and productivity improving practices using Emmet. Emmet is an abbreviation and snippet tool that allows us to type shortcuts, which are then expanded out into complete sections of code. It helps us speed up our coding and remove human error, missing brackets, mistyped class names, and so on. I'm using Emmet in VS Code as it comes built in as standard, but it's also available as a plugin for all of the popular text editors, including Sublime Text, Atom, as well as online services like CodePen. So we'll start here on the VS Code website. I'll put the link down below in the description for you guys. It tells us right at the top that Emmet support is built right into VS Code and no extension is required. The reason that it says this right off the bat is that if you use text editors like Sublime Text or Atom, for example, as I have done, then you have to download Emmet as an additional plugin. You don't have to do this with VS Code as it comes built in as standard. And I think pretty much every developer that works with HTML and CSS is using Emmet these days. So I just assumed that VS Code decided that they would have it included in their text editor to begin with. If I hop over to the Emmet website at emmet.io and go to the download tab over here, we see a list of the editors and tools that you have to download Emmet for if you want to use it. As VS Code users, we're good to go. We have it pre-included and can start to use it straight away. So what is Emmet? Well, going back to the Emmet homepage at emmet.io, it can be summarized simply by this bit at the end here where it says that it greatly improves HTML and CSS workflow. If I expand upon that a little, Emmet is an abbreviation and snippet tool that allows us to type shortcuts, which are then expanded out into complete sections of code. So it lightens the load for us quite a bit. Emmet's auto-completion also means fewer typos, so therefore it helps prevent human error, which is probably the main cause of bugs in web applications. It also speeds things up for us as we have to do a heck of a lot less typing than we normally would have to do without Emmet. Emmet's shortcuts and abbreviations are based on the syntax of CSS, and if you watch the GIF down here, you'll see various examples of Emmet in action in HTML and CSS. We'll basically be typing these short abbreviations and then hitting tab or enter to generate the actual HTML or CSS code. We can do things like type element names, add ID and class selectors. We can also nest elements using the same child and sibling selector syntax found in plain CSS to quickly construct larger blocks of code. When we type the shortcuts, Emmet will open a preview window so you can double check that the end result of your shortcut is what you intend. There's lots of different languages we can use Emmet for, as we see here, but for our purposes we're covering front-end web development and we'll be using Emmet for HTML, CSS, LESS and SCSS, which is just a Sass syntax. So let's go ahead and open up VS Code and we'll have a look at what all the fuss is about. So we'll start simple. With Emmet, we can type any HTML element's name and hit tab or enter, and it will make the opening and closing tags of that element for us. So I have HTML and CSS files open here, and the first thing that you'll notice is that I've already got an HTML boilerplate ready for code to go into. I didn't have to code this from scratch, thankfully, as you can type an exclamation mark and hit tab, and you've got your HTML boilerplate ready to accept your code. The first thing we'll do is link the HTML and CSS files with a link tag, which goes in the head section of our HTML document. So if I type link:/CSS, Emmet will create the link tag for us. And handily, it also fills in the href to the style sheet for us. My style sheet, as you see, is named style.css, so I don't need to change this. But if your style sheet is named differently, you can just add the name right here afterwards. So if I want, say, a p tag in my HTML, then I just go to the body section of the HTML document and type p and hit tab or enter. Any content that goes in this body section is what the browser will render. We can also include script tags in the body section as well, but these don't contain content that will be displayed by the browser to the end user. They just point to scripting files where we write our JavaScript, for example. If I delete that P element and repeat what we just did, you can see that from the moment I type P and before I even invoke Emmet, there is this Emmet abbreviation window that pops up and tells us, okay, if you use me now, this is what you're going to get back. 2 P tags with no content between them. The old way of writing a P tag before Emmet came was to write it out fully. Then came the time where you could just write the opening tag and you had autocomplete to finish the closing tag, as you see here when I do it. Emmet goes further and gives us a much better and easier shortcut. This P tag is used to mark up paragraph text in HTML, so any content that I put in between these opening and closing P tags, the browser knows that when it renders the page, this text is to be displayed as a paragraph. Text inside of a different tag, like an H1 tag for example, would be displayed as a heading. Text inside an A tag would be a link, and so on. So let's put some text into our paragraph. Again, we can use the power of Emmet. So in my P tag, if I type lorem and hit tab, it will give us this. This is Lorem Ipsum placeholder text, and typing lorem, L-O-R-E-M, gives us 30 words of it. We could have also done lorem 30 to produce those same 30 words of text also. Putting a number on the end specifies a given number of words of text that we want. So we can do things like lorem 10, lorem 5, or even lorem 1000 if we really wanted to. I'll just use lorem 5 for now. Lorem ipsum is simply dummy text or placeholder text that has been long used in the printing and typesetting industry. I think it's been in use as long as printing has been around, and the original text is actually in Latin and is derived from a work that's over 2,000 years old. We use it as developers when we may have a design given to us by a designer before a copywriter has written the textual content of a website or web application. So we use Lorem Ipsum as a placeholder when building our sites when we don't have the text that we need. It used to be the case that you'd have to go to a website like this one. This is lipsum.com, and you can go down and enter in the number of words you want. You can generate the text here and then copy and paste it over into your HTML. In addition to P tags, we can write H1, H2, div, UL and LI, or any HTML elements for that matter. That's the very simplest aspect of Emmet, shortcut to make basic HTML elements. So we have a div element here, which is a divider or a division, and we use these as holders for distinct bits of code to separate it from our other content. Then we have a UL or unordered list inside of that div, and we have a nested li or list item. List items are always nested inside of UL or OL elements, and we'll talk in a little bit about using Emmet to build nested structures. But first, the next cool thing that we can do now that we know that we can use Emmet to construct our HTML elements is that we can give these elements classes and IDs. Classes and IDs help us to target particular items with CSS and JavaScript. So, for example, we might have 5 P or paragraph elements on our page, but we might want just one of them to be blue. We could give that particular P element a class or ID and then use that class or ID in our CSS to apply the styling to that one particular element. Let's just say we want to have our div have a class of container, for example, which is really common. Most HTML pages that you build have all of the HTML that is rendered to the page nested in some kind of container. That way you can set things like margins and paddings and alignment on the whole page by targeting the container. So if we wanted to have our div have a class of container, we could just put div.container and hit tab, and you'll see now that our div has that class of container. The dot in front of the container is actually CSS syntax. You see in HTML to add a class to an element, it is denoted by the class keyword. In CSS, when adding a class selector, we just put a dot or a period in front of the class name. So we got this by writing div.container, but we can actually go simpler than that. If you just type the class that you want, in our case, dot container and then hit tab, then div is assumed by Emmet. For other elements that you might use, say p.paragraph or h4.subheading, etc., then you would need to specify the element before the class. Okay, so I'll move all of our content into the container now. On Mac, I can just highlight it, hold Option, and use the arrow keys to move the elements around. I'll give our headings some text inside as well. So, like classes, we can do the exact same thing with IDs. To add an ID with Emmet, we use the hash symbol, as again, this is CSS syntax. We would write ID selectors with a hash symbol. So if I put hash section 1, this will create a div with the ID of section 1. You can see that when Emmet creates the HTML for us, it replaces the CSS syntax with HTML syntax, and IDs are denoted here by the ID keyword. Again, I'm going to take all of our HTML from the H2 element down and move it into the div with the ID of section 1. I'm now going to replace the H1 we have with another that has the ID of main heading. So I do that with H1, then hash main dash heading, and then we add our text content inside again. We can also use IDs and classes at the same time. So if I add a second div with the ID of section-2 and a class of main-content, then the syntax will be hash section-2 dot main-content. So I'll hit tab and there's our div with an ID and class applied to it. We can carry on this chaining to any degree that we want. So if we go into our section 2 div, we can add an element that has several classes and just chain them with Emmet. So we could do p.main-text.paragraph.text-center, which will give us a p element with 3 classes. And when you write this in normal HTML, you just need one class declaration, and each additional class name is separated by a space from the one that preceded it. There's no limit to the number of classes that you can add, and you could put in 1,000 classes if you really wanted them, though of course that would be silly. IDs you should only use once each, as they're much more specific, and you shouldn't use more than one ID on any given element. So I think that covers IDs and classes. Let's have a look at the Emmet syntax when nesting elements. By nesting elements, I mean creating an element that has an element inside of it, which itself has an element inside, and so on. So anytime that you want something nested in an element, you use the greater than symbol, and let's write such a structure with Emmet. So if I do footer.footer, this will create a footer element with the class of footer. I'll then do the greater than symbol with a UL, greater than symbol, and li multiplied by 3. So this is going to give me an unordered list with 3 list items inside. I'll then put dot list item. So this will apply the class of list item to each of those 3 list items. And then I'm going to add some curly braces at the end to add my text in. I'll just put the text as list item and then a $sign. The dollar symbol is basically a numerical placeholder. So when using this symbol, Emmet will replace the $sign with the number corresponding with its position. So in a case where I'm using Emmet to create more than one element, we can use the dollar symbol to write list item 1, list item 2, and list item 3, etc., etc. We could also use these indices when making classes or IDs as well, not just with text. So you could have a class of paragraph-text and then the $sign to say 1, 2, and 3. So if I wanted a containing div with, say, 4 sections that had individually numbered classes, I could do .container, then the greater than symbol, section multiplied by 4, section dash $sign, and Emmet will build that out for us. So again, it's pretty cool stuff, and you can do lots with nesting and using the numerical placeholder. But in terms of nesting elements, we can, nest as many as we like, just using the greater than angled bracket. And once again, we can multiply these and assign text and classes and IDs and so on. So having talked about nesting child elements, I guess we should talk about sibling elements. So if a child element is nested inside of a parent element, then sibling elements are those that share a parent. So for example, in our section 1 div, the UL and the P elements are siblings. To add a sibling, we just add the plus or addition symbol. So if we wanted a div which contains a heading and a paragraph, we could just put div, then the greater than angled bracket, h1 plus p. And you can see that the h1 and p elements are siblings and their div is their parent. This would be a common setup for most sections of a website in which you would have a div or some other semantic HTML element containing the elements that pertain to that particular section. So if I want to do div greater than h1 plus ul greater than li times 3 plus p. So what we want here is a div that has a child element of h1, ul and p, and the ul has 3 list items. So if we use this syntax, we see that the p element ends up inside the list, which is not what we want at all. We want the p element to be a sibling of the ul and not a child. So this is where grouping elements comes in. We can simply group the ul and li tags with parentheses like so. So we could do div greater than h1 plus, and then we do a parentheses, and then it's the ul greater than li times 3 plus p. This way we are saying that we're going to make a div, and inside of it we have an h1 and its sibling, which is the grouped ul with nested li, and then there's another sibling, which is the p element. Okay, so we saw at the start that we can link style sheets, and we can also add scripts. So if we go to the bottom of the body and type script : src, then we can link the JavaScript file after just filling in the src attribute value. I'm not going to take too much more time now, as I think this video is beginning to get a little long. We will just run through some common Emmet shortcuts in CSS, given that we've covered HTML up till this point. I have a simple body selector set up, and we'll write our shortcuts in here. So it's fitting to start with color, which is where everybody starts with CSS. So for color, if we want to do black and white, we can just do C#0 and C#F, as black or white are all zeros or Fs in terms of the hexadecimal color codes. We only need to specify the numerical character once, and Emmet does the rest for us. If we wanted a grey color like C3, C3, C3 for example, then we would only need to specify C3 once. So the shortcut would be C#C3, hit tab, and Emmet does the rest. You get the idea. We can also color the background. Just BG will give us background in black, and BG#F gives us the background in white. I personally prefer to use the background color property, as it is a little more descriptive, and to use that we just put BC, which gives us a white background color. BC# will give us the background color in black. Backgrounds can be images as well as colors, and BI gives us the background image property. We then have the empty URL field to fill in. So if you're looking for good quality images that you can use for any project for free, then check out sites like unsplash.com and pexels.com that are really good for that kind of thing. Okay, let's talk a little bit about setting the display property. We have several options in terms of how our elements display. We can display them as blocks, where the elements take up the whole width of the page and will always start on a new line. We can display them inline, where elements will sit next to each other and only take up the space that their content needs, or even as inline blocks, which behave like a mixture of blocks and inline elements. We can also set display flex for use with flexbox or display none, which removes the element from the normal flow of the page. So the shortcuts for each of these are D for display block, DI will give us an inline display, DIB will give us inline block, and DF will give us display flex. To have the element not display on the page at all and to remove it from the normal flow, then DN will give us display none. For both margin and padding, we can set shorthand properties for the margin and padding as a whole, and properties for each side. So padding top or margin left, etc. We also have shortcuts to specify the units that we want: pixels, percentages, rems, ems, etc., etc. So P1R would give me a padding on all sides of 1 rem. We could do P1 R2R to have padding of 1 rem top and then 2 rem left and right. PR10, without specifying the unit, gives us a padding right of 10 pixels. So if you don't specify a unit in your shortcuts, it will always give you pixels. So PL4E gives padding left of 4 ems, PT10P gives us a padding top of 10%, and PB5P gives a padding bottom of 5%. It's exactly the same process for margins. We can go shorthand or specify each given side. As well, we can specify the units that we want to use. So for example, M15 gives a margin on all sides of 15 pixels. We're not specifying the unit again, and when we don't specify that unit, we always get pixels. MR3E gives us a margin right of 3 ems. ML25P gives us 25% margin left. MT5P gives margin left of 5%, and MB3R gives a margin bottom of 3 rems. Next, we'll have a look at box sizing. The default box that we have is a content box, and you can actually set this yourself if you want to using the BXC shortcut. Boxes are sized with this property by their content. So if you set an element's width to 100 pixels, for example, then the element's content box will be 100 pixels wide, and the width of any border or padding will be added on top of that. Border box tells the browser to account for any border or padding in the values that you specify for an element's width and height. So if you set an element's width to 100 pixels, that 100 pixels will include any border or padding that you have set, and the content box will shrink to absorb that extra width. So typically this makes it much easier to size elements. You can set border box using the BX shortcut. We can set width and height for our boxes as well. So W is the shortcut for width, and then we use units like we have with margin and padding. So W25P gives us width of 25%. H is the shortcut for height. So H50, again without specifying units, gives us a height of 50 pixels. We can also set min width, min height, max width and max height, and the shortcuts for these are MW for min width, MH for min height, MAW for max width, and finally MAH for max height. And again, if you were setting these, then you would also add the units in the same way as we have seen. I'm just leaving them out to show you the shortcuts for the main properties. So that brings us to borders. BD will give us a border with the same border on all sides. BDR will set the right border. BDL will set the left border. BDT the top, and BDB the bottom. It will always give you a 1 pixel solid border in black, and you can easily go in after and change those values if you really need to. We can also set BD:(N) for border none, if we want to remove a border from something like a button that has sometimes styles applied by the browser. Okay, so we've covered color, background, display, padding, margin, box sizing, borders, and we'll finish up by looking at fonts and text very quickly. Okay, so for fonts, if I hit FF or FFS, I will get a font family serif, which is the default option on most browsers. FFSS will give me a simple sans serif font. If I want to have a little more than this simple font declaration and wanted what they call a font stack, we could use something like FFA, which gives us this Arial, Helvetica New, Helvetica, sans serif font stack. We could do FFV, which gives us Verdana, Geneva, sans serif. And I'm sure there are many more of these, but font stacks could be a video in itself. We can also size our fonts. FZ will give us the font size property, and again we can specify some unit here. So for example, FZ 1.6R gives us a font size of 1.6 rems. FZ20 gives us the font size at 20 pixels. We might want to use a font weight property as well, and FW gives us the font weight as normal. FWB gives us a font weight of bold. Many fonts allow us to specify a numerical value as well, usually in hundreds, and set between 100 and 900, with 900 being bolder and 100 being lighter. So FW 300, for example, will give us that numerical value. We might also want some italic or oblique text. FS or FSI will give us font style italic, and FSO will give us oblique text. We might want to decorate our text. TDN will give us text decoration none. TDU will underline our text for us. We can align our text as well, and TA will align it left, which is of course the default value. TAR will align the text to the right. TAC aligns centrally, and also TAG gives us some justified text, which is text in which the letter and word spacing is adjusted so that the text will fall flush between both margins. Lastly, I should mention commenting. A comment is added to code with the purpose of making it easier for people to understand. So we might comment particular sections of HTML, for example. We might want to indicate this section is the header, this is the nav, this is the main content, etc. This is the footer. Commenting code means that anything that is written in the comment is ignored by compilers and interpreters, and therefore the code that we comment out won't be run, it won't be displayed in the browser. So it's really useful for temporarily removing code from our project before we want to commit to totally removing it. We can do that simply by going to the text that we want to comment out and hitting Command or Control and then the /. Now this would be removed totally and would not be applied. We can bring it back in or uncomment it in exactly the same way by selecting it and hitting Command and the /. We can select multiple lines or even whole blocks of code and hit Comment or Command / and it will comment everything that we select. So this is probably actually the number one most used shortcut for me personally. I must comment things hundreds of times every day, and it works in any file and any language that supports comments. So for our purposes, you can use it just fine in HTML, CSS, LESS, SAS, JavaScript, React, and whatever else you want. Just hit Command / and it will comment things out for you. I want to leave you guys with this cheat sheet here from Emmet Docs. And this includes all of the available shortcuts in Emmet, which is way more than it is possible to include in a single video like this. So I'll include that in the description, so please do have a look through it and try different things out on your own. I'll also give you the HTML and CSS files from this video if you want to have a copy of these for yourself. I do suggest that you take some time though to look through the cheat sheet, as this video is just an introduction. I know that there's much more that you can do with Emmet, so please don't get on my case about not showing you lists or animations or shortcuts for the transform property or shortcuts for media queries and imports. I'm well aware of all of these shortcuts, of course, but it's just not possible to show every single shortcut unless we want a video that's an hour long. So I've showed you the stuff that I most commonly use in my workflow day to day. So please try some things out by yourself and find the shortcuts that are most beneficial to you and your own workflow. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers the wonders of Emmet. I hope you guys have found this stuff useful and now have some really useful shortcuts that you can use to speed up your productivity. I would say that more than anything, keep practicing those shortcuts and in no time they will become second nature. You'll be getting your HTML and CSS together lightning quick, and you'll be doing so without making any errors like misspelling things or forgetting to add brackets and quotation marks where they're necessary. So thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe and smash the like button, and I'll see you in the next video, which is on my top 5 VS Code extensions. So see you soon.